Welcome back to the Impact Storytelling Podcast. I'm your host, Sabine Probst Saavedra, nature conservation documentary filmmaker and interview director. Today, I'm joined by a marine biologist whose work is transforming how we understand the lives of killer whales in the North Atlantic. Clare Andvik is a PhD researcher based at the University of Oslo in Norway, working with the Norwegian Orca Survey. Her research focuses on pollutants accumulating in killer whales, particularly how what they eat shapes their toxic load. During her master thesis, Claire and her co-authors showed that orcas that eat seals in addition to fish have much higher levels of toxic pollutants like PCBs and mercury, meaning that they are more at risk of health effects. During her PhD, she is now looking at what the effect of this pollution is on the health of killer whales and how it interacts with other human-made stressors like whale watching and climate change. Today, we'll dive into her work that combines the field of biology, toxicology, and feeding ecology. And while braving the icy conditions of Norway's northern fjords to get data of live whales. Before we jump into the conversation, if you enjoy the Impact Storytelling podcast and want to support it, you can now do so on Patreon. As a patron, you get early access to upcoming guest announcements and the chance to submit your own questions for them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and now let's dive into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Claire. I'm excited to explore the world of orcas with you. Take us back to 2016 when you joined the Norwegian Orca Survey just after finishing your bachelor's degree. What was going through your mind as you experienced your first live encounter with orcas? Did it cement your desire to pursue marine research?
Yeah, so that's a really great memory. I remember 2016. Yeah, I joined Norwegian Orca Survey for the summer. I had sent out loads of emails trying to get experience with orcas, and they had replied, inviting me to come and help them for the summer and do photo ID work. So for those that don't know, photo ID on orcas, it's like when you're taking photographs of the orca's fins, and you can tell apart the individuals based on the marks and nicks on their dorsal fin and also the saddle patch behind their fin. And this is a really, really powerful tool because then you get to know the individuals, you get to find out where they're living, where they're moving, who they're hanging out with, what they're eating, can even start to estimate how old they are. So that summer, we'd actually had really bad weather for quite a long time, and there hadn't really been any orcas around in the area, so we hadn't gone out on the boat that much. And I was trying to be patient, but it was also getting towards the end of my summer there, and I was like, oh, I really, really hope I get to see some orcas before I leave. My boss, Eve Jourdain, who runs Norwegian Orca Survey, who was a co-founder, she was also getting like, I really hope we see something soon. So that morning it was super, super foggy, like you could barely see like your hand in front of your face. So we were in the office doing some work, and then Eve got a call that there were some orcas that had been spotted just down the coast. And I was like, okay, but are we going to be able to go out? And she's like, yeah, apparently like it's the fog is much better down there, so we'll try. But no guarantees. So we all got in the boat and we went out, and the fog just kind of cleared like this curtain, and then suddenly there were just orcas everywhere. And it's the first time I'd ever seen orcas in real life. Obviously, you see so many pictures and videos, but seeing it with your own eyes was just really crazy. And not only were the orcas everywhere, but they started jumping and spy hopping and tail slapping, and it's not so often that you see that kind of behavior in Norway. So it was really special. Yeah, definitely
Yeah,
a
definitely
good
sounds
memory.
wonderful. And with photo ID, and there you can also identify male and female, right? Because I think the dorsal fin of the males is much larger and longer than of the female, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, you don't even need photos necessarily for that,
Yeah,
because you
true.
can see like a adult male. They have a very, very high dorsal
Yeah,
fin.
yeah.
It can reach up to 2 meters,
Wow.
and the females are a lot smaller. But photo ID can help when you have a very young animal,
Mm-hmm.
because when it's like quite a young, if it's a young male, sometimes young males can look like females because their fin hasn't kind of sprouted yet, hasn't grown up tall. But if you take photos of that same individual over time, you can see if it doesn't change, you're like, okay, you're a female, and then if it has a baby, then you're definitely a
Yeah.
female. But if you if you can see the fin start to change shape over time, you can be like, aha, I think you're a male. So that's super cool.
Yeah, definitely seen that on the photos when you like Google orca and then some have really long fins and the other ones smaller.
Yeah,
I'm like, I think there must be a difference between the genders.
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
And that summer internship led directly to your master thesis on pollutant levels in killer whales. Can you walk us through how you transitioned from photo ID work to measuring contaminants? What was there a pivotal moment that made you say, "This is my path"?
Oh, yeah, that was a case of kind of being in the right place at the right time, and I still feel incredibly lucky that that managed to happen. So when I was doing that summer internship with Norwegian Orca Survey, I was coming towards the end of my bachelor's, and I was starting to think about what I wanted to do in my master's. I was getting quite interested in like toxicology, which looks at pollution and contaminants, because I've been reading that that was one of the biggest threats facing killer whales, and not just killer whales, but like our oceans and even humans. And it was something that felt like very kind of practical and tangible to kind of like, okay, but this is something that maybe we can fix, like we can actually do something. Um, so I remember I was up in northern Norway, and I was chatting to Eve and Rikard, who are the co-founders of Norwegian Orca Survey, and they had just got some permits to start taking biopsy samples from the killer whales. So that's like a small bit of blubber and skin. Um, and they were doing it. Eve was very interested in, she was finishing off her PhD and was very interested in looking at how you could use those skin samples, especially to look at what a whale is eating. So looking very much on the feeding ecology. But she was kind of saying like, like we could also look at pollution in that, but that's not really my area. And I was like, oh, but maybe there's something I could do. That would be really interesting. And she's like, oh, that would be great to have a student on that. Um, so it kind of went from there. I managed to find a supervisor at the University of Oslo that was willing to take on this project. That was Professor Katrine Borgo. And we just ended up being like the perfect team because Eve brought in a lot of killer whale knowledge, but she didn't know so much about the pollution, and Katrine brought in the toxicology knowledge, but not so much about the orcas. So it ended up being this great little team that ended up being really successful. We published the paper, and now we're working on even more papers together and projects together.
Sounds great that
Yeah.
you all found each other and could work together.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you're in the right place at the right time, and everything just kind of fits together. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And one paper you've published in 2020 in the scientific reports revealed that seal eating orcas had 4 times higher PCB levels and double the mercury compared to fish eaters. Can you explain why a change in diet leads to such dramatic increase?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that paper was based on my master thesis, and the bottom line is that a lot of these contaminants, they do what we call bioaccumulating in organisms. So that means that they're kind of building up in the food chain, so that the animals right at the top, they get the highest levels of contaminants, and that's because these contaminants are often what we call fat soluble. So they kind of apportion to the fat in organisms, and they kind of prefer to be in organisms than in the water. And each level on a food chain, each predator has to eat more prey. So you have a loss of energy up in the food chain, right? So one killer whale has to eat like, I don't know, loads and loads of fish, and those fish have to eat loads and loads of zooplankton and so on. But because these contaminants are very, very persistent, they don't break down. Even though you have a loss of energy up in the food chain, you don't have a loss of contaminants, so they kind of end up going all the way up to the top, to the killer whales at the top in this example. And if you have an extra layer in that food chain, so if you have a killer whale that's eating seals, which is then eating fish, rather than a killer whale just eating fish, you have an extra layer, which is an extra layer for energy to be lost and for contaminants to build up. So we hypothesized that the sea leiters would be having the killer whales that ate seals would be having higher levels of these contaminants, and that is what we found. And that had quite big implications because until then, all the research on killer whales in Norway, they'd just been kind of assumed that they were eating fish, and the pollution levels were quite low because they're just eating fish and we don't need to be too concerned. But with that paper, we kind of showed, well, some of them are eating seals as well as fish, and we kind of have reason to be a bit more concerned about those guys because they have really high levels of these contaminants.
Yeah. Why
Yeah.
did they start eating seals as well instead of just fish?
Oh, that's another very good question, and something that we're actually trying to figure out at the moment. So one of the hypotheses of why some groups started eating seals as well as fish is because it's basically prey availability. So how much fish is available. So in the 1970s, the herring stocks really collapsed in Norway due to a lot of overfishing, and there was very, very little herring around, which was is and is still is the main prey for the killer whales. So our hypothesis is that maybe some groups started diversifying into eating other organisms and other prey, such as marine mammals, during that time because there was very little fish available. And that's something we're trying to test now. We've got some teeth from killer whales back in the 1970s and also some teeth from killer whales that were stranded today. And we can do different types of analysis in the teeth to kind of find out what the whale was eating at those different time points and how that would change over their life. So we're quite excited to kind of compare that to that time when the herring stocks went down and if maybe some of those individuals started diversifying their prey in that time. So stay tuned. Hopefully, we'll come with some answers. And it could be that just some groups have some kind of adaptive potential that they kind of see an opportunity and they go for it. But yeah, there's we'll probably never know for certain, but we can have a go at trying to see.
So you can see at the teeth what they were eating, or how does
Yeah,
that work?
it's a very cool analysis called stable isotope analysis.
Oh,
So I won't go into all the details, but basically, you can so a killer whale tooth, they get an extra layer. I can put a little image up here later.
mhm.
But as they get older, they have growth layers in their teeth. So for each year that they age, another growth layer, like a little bit like a tree. So like rings on a tree, you can see the lines on a tooth, so you can find out how old a whale is. You can take a small sample from each of those growth layers, and then you can measure the stable isotopes of carbon and the stable isotopes of nitrogen in those tissues. And the stable isotopes of nitrogen, that ratio between them, it increases when they eat higher trophic prey. And the stable isotopes of carbon, so the ratio between the stable isotopes of carbon change based on what habitat they're feeding in. So it's like this principle of you are what you eat. So you've got these chemical traces that kind of remain in the body that you can then analyze for. And then by comparing, you can figure out approximately what they were eating during that time, or at least relative to each other.
Wow,
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's incredible like what is possible just like from a
Yeah,
tooth, like how much knowledge you can get.
yeah, especially from so far back in time that you can still get
Yeah,
information from there.
exactly. It's pretty incredible. It's like having a little peek hole into the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what does it do to an animal if they exceed these pollutant thresholds? What are health risks that orcas are facing? And where do these pollutants even come from?
Yeah, many good questions. So these contaminants, a lot of them have been linked to a range of really bad health effects. So one, for example, is it can affect their immune system. So it can weaken the immune system and make them more susceptible to other illnesses, so they can get sick easier. Some of them can also affect the brain, so neurotoxicity. So can basically impact the brain function. Some of them can lead to cancer, so that then they develop cancer if they have damaged DNA. They can also cause problems with reproduction, so making it maybe harder to get pregnant, so fertility, and also making it harder for to sustain a pregnancy. So it can make it really hard to yeah to get for reproduction. Um, and what's also scary is that these contaminants get passed on to the offspring as well. So they get passed on through the milk. They come from a lot of the contaminants that we're looking at are human-made. So they're all human-made, and the only exception is mercury. Mercury is a natural element. It's found naturally in the world. It's part of the Earth's crust and can be released from volcanoes. But the amount of mercury in our environment has increased dramatically since the Industrial Revolution. And that's mainly because of coal mining and also so coal burning and gold mining. We're releasing a lot of mercury into the atmosphere. So even though it's a natural element, it's human activity that's causing it to be so present. But yeah, a lot of these contaminants are used in industry. They're used on furniture, for example, to make them less flammable. They're used as pesticides, like pest control. They're used in electronics. And a lot of them can be used in things that we actually use every day, like personal care products or waterproof jackets and yeah, ski wax and have a really quite a range of sources.
Yeah, it's crazy where all these pollutants can come from. And I think at least by now we should be aware of the environmental dangers of the things we use or also produce. But I think sadly a lot of people care more about themselves and profits, at least in the bigger companies, more than about our planet. And I hope that more people will go into researching safer products that also can be available then, and maybe
Yeah.
hopefully for the same prices. Not
Yeah, I
everyone
hope so
thinks of the
too.
power. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I don't think it's so much I think as consumers we can be aware of what we're buying.
Mm,
But I think a lot of people as well, we have trust that the things that we buy are going to be safe for us.
yes.
And so it's a huge job though for the authorities to try and keep on top of all these chemicals
Mm,
because there's just thousands and thousands of them. And one of the problems is that as soon as you manage to gather enough evidence that one chemical is harmful
yeah.
and it eventually gets banned, it's very easy to kind of move an element or like a group around and call it something new.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have a new chemical and you have to kind of start from scratch again. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as a consumer, I don't know what most things mean. So when I buy something, I have to use an app to scan it and see if it's like vegan and natural.
Yeah,
Because I don't know what all of
exactly.
that means. So it's really
Yeah.
yeah, on the companies and on the governments to say you can use that, and this you can't use because it's dangerous. So I think yeah, it's hard for us to know, but I hope if when there is more
Yeah.
research for more eco-friendly products that can be used more.
Absolutely. And it is getting better with more and more apps that we can use to try and check the ingredients of the things that we're buying. And we as consumers, we can also put pressure on politicians and on lawmakers that this is something that we want them to address, that this is something that we want to change. So we do have a lot of power as consumers to kind of try and push through those changes and show that this is something that we care about and is important.
Mm. Yeah, it doesn't only affect us, but also the environment. Have you analyzed a 10-day-old orca calf with very high pollutant levels? Can you share the deeper implications of maternal transfer and what it signals for calf health and population resilience?
Yeah, for sure. So this was a really sad case, and we published an article about how we found these contaminants in this 10-day-old orca that just had milk in its tummy. So it hadn't really eaten any other food. So all of the contaminants in its body had come from its mother. And we don't know whether the orca died because of the contaminants. I think it actually stranded on some rocks. And when you do find a dead orca, you can't be like, oh, it died because of contaminants. But sometimes it can be quite likely that it is a contributing factor, at least. So basically for any population, the ability to have offspring, that is the most important thing in terms of population resilience, right? Like your population is not going to be healthy if all of the babies are dying or if all of the females are becoming infertile. And a lot of it also depends on how much food is available in the environment. So in Norway, we're quite lucky that it seemed to be quite a lot of food available. We are seeing quite a lot of calves being born. Um, my colleague Eve is working on some population development models, but we don't have, yeah, we can't say for sure right now, but they do seem to be calves being born at least. But if you compare that to, for example, the Scotland population of orcas. There's just two individuals left there. And a few years ago, one of the females stranded dead with her body so full of contaminants, like I think it was the most amount of contaminants that they'd ever found in an orca. And they looked at her reproductive system, and they could work out that she had never been pregnant, so she was very likely infertile. And her body was so full of contaminants, and there's no females left in that population now. They've never had any calves, and one of the likely explanations is because that they have very, very high levels of these contaminants. And it can affect the females, especially if they are reproducing. It takes a huge toll on their body. They need a lot of food to be able to have enough energy to grow a baby, and then to breastfeed, to nurse. So yeah, it all kind of ties into each other. Like, if you have a lot of food and these contaminants are just staying in the blubber, then maybe you don't see so many effects because the contaminants are sticking in the blubber. But if you're starting to metabolize that blubber because you don't have enough food or you're having a baby, then that's when you can start to see the nastier health effects.
Oh, it's really sad that these pollutants are given from one generation to the next,
Yeah.
and the orcas can't do anything about it.
Yeah, it's just so it feels quite hopeless sometimes because you can't really go in and get those out of the environment that are already there. All we can hope now is that we can just stop any more entering the environment. And eventually, they will start to like come out of the orca population. We do see quite promising signs in some populations that um, levels of some banned contaminants are going down over time. So it's slowly going down, but it's going to take a long time. So we just need to do everything we can to not put any other pressure on them.
And when you're collecting samples, how do you do that ethically and safely in such a challenging environment?
Yeah, so I work with it's Norwegian Orca Survey that take the samples, but I've been really lucky to be able to join them on field work a few times, and they are very, very careful with the way they take samples, making sure that everything is ethical and safe and not causing any impact on the whales. So I'm very proud to be part of an organization that takes animal welfare so seriously. So what we do is that we always make sure that we take photographs of the killer whales that we see, because there's not really much point taking a sample from a whale if we don't know who they are, because that limits the amount of information. We want to make sure that the sample we can get the most information and data out of as possible, to make the potential impacts less in terms of the eventual benefit. So we make sure that we know the group, and we can make sure that the body condition of the whales is suitable, that they're not looking thin or stressed or like they are in kind of trouble, in any kind of trouble. And we make sure that there's not too many, at least the whale that we're trying to try and get a sample from, that there's no possibility of hitting a calf. So we don't sample any young animals because then that can have a big impact on them. So we make sure that we target older animals. The biopsy system we have, it shoots like a very small dart. It's about 3 centimeters long. And when you compare that to a 7, 8 meter long whale, it's really, really, really tiny. Because yeah, they're huge animals. And we shoot it just behind the dorsal fin. And it just kind of makes a very small mark in their skin and pulls out a small sample of blubber and skin. And we can then use that for all of these different analyses. We then monitor the behavior of the whales, and very often they're a little bit surprised. You kind of see them go like, "Oh, what was that?" Like just in the same way that could maybe sneak up behind you and like tap you on the shoulder, like you'd be like, "Whoa, what?" But then they very often just kind of resume their normal behavior and do what they did before. And so we're pretty confident that there's no long-term implications, just kind of a short-term disturbance. Um, we can also look at pictures of the wound site, and we see that even the next day it's almost completely healed over. Like, so we can see that it heals very quickly. So we're pretty confident that the methods we use in the diving system is not causing any long-term impacts on the whales. And of course, make sure that the equipment is all sterile and clean and not introducing any potential for infection.
So does that have a floaty at the back or something, or how are you gonna collect that afterwards? Or are you shooting the dart and then it's there,
Yeah.
or how does that work?
So the dart is it's attached to kind of a floating like the whole arrow basically can float in the water. And it's just kind of the end of the dart that casts a sample. So it kind of bounces off the whale and it floats in the water. And then it's the job of getting a net and trying to fish out the dart and then getting the sample out and storing it correctly. So it's always a big operation, but it got a lot more streamlined over the years too.
And the person that's shooting, does that have shooting training too? Because I mean, yeah, it's big, but still, I don't know if I would be able to hit the right spot.
Yeah. I've never shot the gun myself. But the guys that shoot have got really used to it, so they've been practicing and they get a feel for it over time. Yeah.
Do you only have like one try? If you didn't hit it, then you have to wait, or
No, it depends a little bit on the group. Often we can see the strongest reaction when you actually hit the water, 'cause I think it makes a bit more of a noise. So sometimes if you miss and it makes a big splash in the water, the whales are just like, "Oh my gosh, what was that?" And they're just like, "We're out of," and they're like really on edge. Whereas it's quite interesting. Normally, when you actually get a sample, the other whales don't really notice, and the one that you get a sample from hardly notices much as well. So sometimes if you miss, it's very hard to get close to the whales again. But sometimes if they don't really care or they're busy feeding or doing something else, then you can have another go. And we always make sure that we have multiple darts and arrows available so that we can clean them in between and make sure that a nice clean one is ready to go. Yeah.
okay. And can you recount a memorable field moment, maybe a difficult biopsy attempt or an unforgettable sighting that illustrates
Oh,
the complexity of doing science at sea?
yes. I can tell you a story about how this was in the winter of 2020. So this was the COVID winter, and we'll talk a bit later, I guess, about multi-whale, but we're looking at multiple stressors. So this COVID winter was really important because this was when we were going to be taking samples from killer whales that were not being disturbed by any whale watching boats, because we wanted to kind of see the impact of whale watching. So this was a really exciting winter because we were pretty much one of the only boats on the water because there were very little tourists around because of the COVID travel restrictions. And we were so excited to get some samples and we had everything ready and we go out on the boat, we find some orcas, we shoot the dart and we're like, oh my gosh, everything's going so well. And we get the dart out and the whole arrow had like broken apart and the dart had been lost. Like the arrow had like, yeah, it like had broken. And they were like, oh my gosh, because we were trying out at this point, we were trying out some new arrows. We'd been using wood, but we wanted to try out a different type of material to see if this could work better. So we tried another one, and then everything was just breaking, and it was just awful. And we're like losing samples, and we were losing time, and we were getting really, really stressed. And this was like a good example of like using the community because we were in quite a remote area, like a small village in the middle of northern Norway. Um, and it was Rikard, who is the co-founder of Norwegian Orca Survey, who kind of reached out in the community and saw if anyone had a wood shop that he could use to try and make some more of these darts. Because all our darts were breaking, and we tried this new material, and it was obvious that this new material, which had worked well in the summer, was not working very well in the Arctic winter when the temperatures were much less. So it's like, okay, we have to try and make some more of these darts out of wood. And so him and another guy, they were just using the whole evening, like in this woodshed making wood. And we were like there, like trying to get all the rest of the material ready and like doing the data sampling and like getting everything ready. And like, is our field season over? Like we don't have any darts left. This is going to be a disaster. But they managed to use the woodshed in the school and they made these darts and they got everything ready. And we went out the next day and we got like 5 samples using these darts. And it was like the rest of the season was saved. And we were just, it's just incredible like how you go from such a low to such a high again so quickly. But everyone kind of rallied around and like did something to help make it work, and we managed to save the field season. And now some of those samples are some of the most valuable samples that we have, because it was from such a unique time, where it was this COVID year where there were not many boats on the water.
That's
Yeah.
good that something good came out. At least of
Yes.
even of COVID, something good came out, at least
Yeah.
in
Really.
research. I think maybe it was a bit helpful
Yeah.
to see the difference. And we talked earlier already a little bit about the contaminants, but are there any new ones that are standing out now? And did any of those findings catch you off guard?
Yeah. So when we did that study where we looked at that baby orca, that 10-day-old orca calf, what was quite surprising and shocking to us was that we looked for these they're called emerging brominated flame retardants. So these are type of chemicals that are used as to help stop fire, basically. So they make it so that things aren't as flammable. So they're often put on, for example, furniture or like textiles and things, so that if your house starts burning, like things aren't as likely to catch fire. So obviously a very good purpose, but the chemicals themselves can be very toxic. So in that study, we found two of these flame retardants in that baby orca. So the only way they could have got into that baby orca was from its mother. So it showed that not only are those contaminants bioaccumulating, but they're also being passed on into the offspring. And that was the first time that we'd shown that it was actually transferring to offspring in a marine mammal, which is very important information for regulators to know, because these contaminants, we also have found out that they are toxic, but they are also they're not regulated. They're still being used every day. They're being used, and more are being produced, and more are going to be released into the environment. Um, so by showing that they are in this baby orca, we could help the regulators start putting in some measures to try and get those chemicals banned. Because if you can see that they are going into top predators, it shows that they are bioaccumulative and that they are being passed on to offspring. And chemicals that we produce today, they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So all chemicals that we produce and use today, with some exceptions, you're supposed to show that they are not bioaccumulative, that they are not persistent, and that they are not toxic. Um, so that was a pretty surprising finding, but hopefully something that can help make a difference.
And based on your findings, you've then engaged with chemical regulations in Europe. How does your science inform policy? And can you share a story where research translated into tangible regulatory decisions? Was that one that we just talked about?
Yeah, that's a really good example. And actually, after my master's, I worked at the Norwegian Environment Agency for a year in their chemical regulation section. So that was really eye-opening for me to be able to see how the research uh, that I did as a master's and as a research assistant and now as a PhD, how that is used by regulators. Um, so basically all the data that you can publish of these chemicals in top predators, that can be used as evidence that those chemicals are bioaccumulative. And if you can combine that with some other harmful qualities, you can use that to put together a big dossier to try and get those chemicals banned. Another really good example here is PFAS, and that's something that I was working on when I was at the Norwegian Environment Agency. So PFAS are perfluorinated alkyl substances. Yeah. And they are used a lot in, for example, Teflon frying pans and waterproof jackets and ski bags. And they are basically designed to be water resistant, so like non-stick, these kind of things. And there's thousands and thousands of them. But they are all incredibly persistent. They're known as like the forever chemicals that are like in the environment forever. So I was working on that project where they were getting together, Norway was getting together with a few other European countries and pushing forward a movement to start banning PFAS as an entire chemical group. And this is the first time actually that they was trying to ban an entire chemical group rather than just each individual chemical. Because as I mentioned earlier, one of the issues is when you ban each individual chemical, and some of these PFAS have been banned and regulated, like some of the more widely used and the more harmful ones. But then the issue is that they just start using another PFAS instead, and all of them kind of can share like the same bad quality of being incredibly persistent in the environment. So this is a great first step into starting to ban whole chemical groups. And I'm really hopeful that we can start to apply this to other chemical groups, that we can um, start banning chemicals rather than individually, but like whole groups, because I think that's the only way we're going to start to make some progress on getting these chemicals out of our environment. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great if we could do that. And earlier you already mentioned that we're going to talk about the multi-whale project, and that project tackles multiple stressors. Could you explain what these stressors are and share one story from the project that highlights them coming together?
Yes, I would love to talk about this project. This is a really cool project that kind of grew out from the master thesis. So we we've been doing a lot of research so far on the effect, so on how much of these contaminants are in the killer whales. But what we then wanted to look at is what the effect of these contaminants are, and also with other stressors. So in the multi-well project, we're looking at the simultaneous effect of three stressors. One of them is pollution and contaminants, so how that's affecting the whales. We're also looking at whale watching as a potential stressor. So in Norway, the whale watching industry has grown dramatically since about 2012, which is when the herring and the killer whales moved into areas close to Tromsø, which is northern Norway's biggest city. And this really increased the popularity and the accessibility of whale watching. And combined with some, beautiful social media images of killer whales in Norway, like the activity has just kind of grown exponentially. But it's completely unregulated. So there's been a lot of complaints and talk about how this is kind of a Wild West situation. That there are sometimes there's more whale watching boats than actual whales. And yeah, and there's like lots of anecdotal reports of disturbance, that the killer whales are being potentially disturbed from feeding. Um, there's a lot of people getting in the water with them. There's a lot of tourists. It can be a pretty chaotic situation. But we don't know whether this is actually impacting the whales. Is it stressing them out? Is it a stressor? And if it is, how that's interacting with some of the other stressors. Um, the third stressor that we're looking at is a prey availability, which kind of links into nutritional stress. So, if these whales are not getting enough food, how that's impacting their bodies. So, if they are experiencing any kind of nutritional stress. And that links a little bit into, for example, climate change. So, changes in the fish stocks in the environment. So, how those fish are moving around impacts the prey availability. And it also impacts like what prey is available and how much of that prey is available. Um, so an example of how they're all looking together, the project that I'm working on at the moment, which I'm hoping to get published quite soon, is we're looking at hormones in the killer whales. So in particular, we're interested in cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So we've taken samples from killer whales from, for example, that COVID winter where there were very, very few whale watching boats around, and also in the winters where there's been lots and lots and lots of whale watching boats. We can actually start to look at the differences in cortisol levels in whales between those different seasons. And we're looking at that in the context of also how much pollution those whales are having as well. Because if a whale is being consistently disturbed by a whale watching boat, if they're maybe not getting the food that they need, then that's when they'll start to metabolize the pollution in their blubber, because they're starting to burn up their fat storage, and that's when you can start to see these health effects, and that can also in turn lead to higher cortisol in their body, and also affect some of the other hormones in their body. Um, and so that also links also into their prey availability. If they're getting disturbed from eating by whale watching boats, if they've been disturbed from eating on the herring, maybe they're going to either starve, or potentially they're even going to start eating something else if prey availability goes down. Um, Also links back to if they start eating less herring, perhaps then they're going to be eating more marine mammals like seals, which then also means that they're going to be getting more contaminants in their body, and which has its own effects as well. So it's a really complex picture that we're trying to put all the puzzle pieces together. But stay tuned to hear about how the whale watching is impacting them. and hopefully we will get that out published soon.
Maybe that one question you can answer already. If someone is interested in going to see a whale, what should they take care of when booking a tour or where to go? Mm.
Yeah.
Are there any eco labels or anything you can look out for?
Oh, yeah, no, this is something we've actually been talking about, trying to implement some kind of eco label to make sure that you're going with a good operator. I would think for sure just do your research. There are some operators that look at like the reviews as well and try and choose one that is um has like very good reviews, that they're not going to be chasing the whales, that they're not going to be taking too many people out. You can also, I would recommend that you try and go for multiple trips, because then that puts a lot less pressure on your operator to get you really, really close to the whales and to see them. Because if you can kind of be like, like I'm coming again tomorrow, like that really, really helps, because I think a lot of these operators feel this pressure when people are on the boat and they want that Instagram moment, right? They want to be able to, and they're like, this is the only trip I'm going on. I have to see the orcas. I have to be really close, and I want to get in the water and I want to swim with them. And I'm not saying like point blank that swimming with them is harmful to the whales. I think sometimes, and I think whale watching, I'm not saying point blank that whale watching is harmful either. I think both of those things can be done in a very ethical way. And there are some operators that can do it in an ethical way. But I think when you have a situation with like 10 boats around a single group of whales, that's a point where you can also say to your operator, I'm not comfortable with the situation. I want us to leave. And maybe then you'll leave and you'll find another group and you have the group all to yourself. But these operators feel so much pressure. Often they go to where the other boats are because they know that they have whales, like, so they drive to where all the other boats are because they're like, okay, then at least my tourists will be able to see some whales. But don't be afraid to use your voice and be like, no, I don't want to be around other boats. You know, I don't care if that means that I don't get as close to the whales. I'd rather that I can be sure that they're not being disturbed.
Mm. Yeah, on the one side, it's good that so many people are interested in marine life now, but on the other side, it's putting a lot of pressure on it too.
Yeah, I think so. And I think as consumers, again, we have a role that we can play. We can start to be vocal about what we value. And if operators know that their tourists care about the whales in that way, and perhaps are happy to not get as close or be around other boats if that's what's best for the whales, then hopefully then they'll all be scrambling with each other to try and be the most eco-friendly, the most whale-friendly operator. We can hope. Yeah.
What changes or bans would you most likely want to see implemented to protect marine mammals?
I still think the most serious threat to them is contaminants. So I would love to see a world where we could just be like, no more harmful contaminants are being produced. That we could be sure that no more is going into the environment, and that the contaminants that we have already produced can be safely disposed of. Um, One of the problems is that in a lot of Western countries, they end up exporting a lot of their contaminant waste, or especially electrical waste, for example. They end up exporting it to third world countries that don't actually have the facilities to deal with it. Um, and then those contaminants end up going back into the environment and ending up in the north again anyway, because they potentially get burnt or leached into the environment down there, and then get carried by wind and currents up to the north. So it's not really a long term solution anyway. Um, I would also like to be sure that we could protect their food sources. I think food is one of the most important things, to making sure that they have enough to eat, because often they can still have babies and they can still reproduce and be healthy, even with contaminants in their body, as long as they have enough food. Um, so, in particular, if you've heard of the southern resident population in Canada, they're very famous for being under a lot of threat because of contaminants and because of food shortage. And I think if they can have enough food and make sure that the salmon that they rely on is available, that is one of the biggest things that can help. It makes them a lot more resilient in dealing with the other stressors that are potentially harder to deal with.
Is that because of overfishing that they're having a food shortage or climate change, or what's the problem there?
The southern residents is because a lot of the rivers have got dams in them, so it's making it
Mm-hmm.
harder for the salmon to spawn and go back to their spawning
Yeah.
grounds and then to reproduce. So there's quite a few fantastic groups that are campaigning to remove some of the bans in some of these rivers to
Mm-hmm.
help restore the salmon populations.
So amazing people are working on it.
Yes, I think in orca research, there's well in any research, I think you start to realize how many incredible groups there are out there, and one of the best things is that you do get in contact with people from so many different research groups and conservation groups and NGOs who are all working for a common cause. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always nice to see.
Mm.
And looking back, which orca encounter, sea leader or otherwise, remains the strongest memory for you and why?
Um, I would still probably say that very first encounter, really stands out just because it was, like, that first one, and you have that, like, incredible, like, awe and excitement. There's been some incredible encounters since as well. We've had, like, orcas kinda swimming right around the boat and kinda, like, looking up at you and, yeah, fantastic experiences. I think in the winter as well, like, the sheer number of orcas, like, we were once on the boat and you could just look around and you could just see orcas just, like, just everywhere, like, like, so many fins, it was incredible. Um, yeah, no, I feel very lucky that I've had the opportunity to do these kind of field works and see these kind of things. Yeah.
You're really doing amazing research, so it's great that you
Oh.
get to see a lot of them too.
Yeah, no, but I'm just yeah, I'm grateful that I work with such incredible people because I couldn't do it by myself.
Yeah.
No.
And what's your next big question for the multi-whale project or beyond?
Yeah, so our next big question is so we're looking at this hormone work, so looking at the effect of, on the cortisol levels, and after that we're looking at further effects of these stresses. So kind of looking at how genes are responding to these stresses as well. So something called transcriptomics and metabolomics, which is how all the gene functions in your body can respond to these stresses. So that I'm really excited to look at that as a way to look on a finer level how the whales are responding to contaminants, how they're responding in general, like how stressed out they are, and comparing that to whale watching activity. And also looking at if we can see any nutritional stress if they are actually starving in any way or potentially being disturbed from feeding. Um, so that's gonna be really cool. We have some projects as well where we're going to try and compare that to the populations in Canada, so we can kind of put the Norwegian population in context with other populations, and we have some great colleagues working on some of those populations that will be helping us put everything together. Also, Eve, who is the postdoc on the study of from Norwegian Orca Survey as well, she's going to be doing these population development models as well to kind of be looking at how these stressors are going to translate into any potential population effects. So I think all of that just puts it in like this wider context of like, okay, you found this, but so what? What does that mean? And I think that's what's so exciting with science is like to look at what it means in the bigger context.
Yeah, exciting research coming ahead.
I hope so.
And for young scientists or science moms dreaming of marine mammal research, what advice would you give based on your journey?
I would say just keep asking, keep looking for opportunities. It only takes one person to say yes, for you to suddenly get an opportunity. So in my case, I sent out quite a few emails and trying to find an opportunity, and then it just took Norwegian Orca Survey just to say yes, and suddenly I had this whole path mapped out. And yeah, it's one I've heard from so many friends as well that they send out, hundreds and thousands of emails and you get no replies or you get no's or whatever. And it just takes one person out of 1,000 to say yes. Or let's have a chat. And it can grow from there. I would say as well, like, of course, a lot of people want to work with marine mammals, but don't just kind of get locked on one species or one organism group because so many of the skills that you can learn can be applied to other animals. So there's contaminants like measuring contaminants, measuring stress hormones, measuring diet. It's all the same method, whether you do it in a killer whale or whether you do it in a mouse or a springtail or an insect, like it's all like the same methods in the lab. And that's the most important thing, because once you learn those methods and that data analysis and statistics, then you can apply it to any species. Um, so yeah, try and just see what opportunities are out there and like kind of look at how you can apply that to different organisms. And to mums, yeah, I'm a mum of two kids. And I just want to say that like you don't have to choose between being a scientist and a mother. And you shouldn't have to choose. You can embrace both. My girls have joined me on field work up in northern Norway and in Canada and yeah, around Vancouver Island and Australia. We went to a conference last year and they joined for that. Of course, it depends on your personal situation and the policies of your country. I'm very lucky that I have a very supportive husband and great opportunities during my PhD to be able to take maternity leaves. But I think it's good to normalize the fact that we're mothers, but we're also scientists.
Thank you so much for sharing your work and your journey in science. It was really interesting listening to you and having a conversation with you. And yeah, I hope to hear more soon about your new research.
Thank you. It was really great chatting, and I'm always very happy to share all things to do with killer whales.